In today's episode, we discuss with James about how ornithophobia affected his life. Could it be fixed? This is Tools of the Humans. I am TC and I'll host this episode with Russell Hemmings. James, welcome to Tools of the Humans. James, you are a successful presenter, an entrepreneur, author, creator. And here we are, you're sharing your story which starts and ends with ornithophobia, which is phobia of birds.
So yes, ornithophobia is something I've suffered from for many years now, a fear or phobia of birds. I probably had it 35, 40 years. And the first instance, I actually don't remember it, but I'm told by my mum, was in Trafalgar Square in London when I was very young, maybe only 3 or 4 years old. And apparently I was sort of playing with the pigeons and then something happened and a number of pigeons, came close or sort of swooped on me. And apparently that upset me. As I said, I don't actually remember that. But that, I believe, is probably the first instance. And then over that time, that phobia has got gradually worse. I can remember probably the next incident. I was maybe 11, 12, coming back from school, and I found we lived in the country, and I found a small bird in my bedroom. Actually, I had this miniature snooker table, and the bird was sitting on it. And I remember being petrified, really, and sort of running out the house. It's funny, that bird in my mind over the next few decades became bigger. It almost became like a crow. I'd imagine that it was a lot worse, but actually, as I really thought back about it, it probably was a much smaller bird as well. So that sort of phobia grew and grew, and probably culminated a couple of years ago. I'm a runner, track, marathon, and I live in Dubai, and I train outdoors. And in the area where I live, where I do a lot of running, there are crows, as there are crows in many cities around the world. And in one case, I do my morning early running because of the heat. And in one situation, when I was running, I felt something approach and just touch me, and it was a crow. And then again, the fear, the catastrophic feelings were really bad. And I remember I was doing a loop, and as I ran back, I thought, well, that's not going to happen again. And it did. On the same, like 30 minutes later, it was probably the same crow, came down, didn't touch me this time, but swooped. And I remember that again, the adrenaline, the fear. And that happened another two times, probably different crows over the course of 12 months. And what I did, I stopped using those routes, and eventually actually couldn't really run in my neighborhood at all because of that fear. And then I started to try and get some help on this a couple of times unsuccessfully. And then I met Russell.
For the man of the street, obviously, this is not a common thing that you hear about. But I'm really curious to know from both of you guys, what triggers, what was triggering, what aspects of the birds were triggering your phobia. Probably Russell as the answer as a therapist, and you have the answer, from your side. What was that?
I can think of 3 cases of bird phobia, and they're all different. One was fear of chickens, and then another one was pigeons. And the more intense phobia that I worked with was the one with James, which was a combination. So they can vary, and they vary because of the experiences we have. So, and I can talk about those individual cases later.
Fear was all birds, really, all of them, from the smallest, to the largest. I suppose the crow event, is probably at the top of that pyramid, if you like, because especially in the last 3 years, because of, I don't call them attacks anymore. I used to call them attacks because they're not an attack. And again, that's part of the work we've been doing. We just call it when the crow swooped close. That sort of crow became at the top of the hierarchy. But it was really all birds. What were the triggers? It's a really interesting one. There was the flapping of the wings. the close proximity. So particularly inside, or if I could never sit outside at a nice cafe, having a coffee outside, when you've got all the pigeons around. I wasn't able to do that, because those types of pigeons were quite bold. They were, come near you, and they're coming for food. They're not coming for any other reason. But that would unsettle me. And because they would flap quickly, it's the speed and the dexterity of birds. It's that suddenness that would, create that anxiety.
He would notice those shadows, whereas other people wouldn't notice them.
No, absolutely. You're right. Shadows, the sound, and indoor, enclosed spaces was also a problem. I suppose maybe that sort of fear of not being able to escape, whereas in the great outdoors, there was less anxiety.
This phobia was limiting you in certain ways in your life. But was there any episode, or what motivated you to overcome this fear? Was there any specific event that made you realize that you needed help? And then you said you went through some help, but didn't help properly. So finally you found Russell that help you out with the right tools.
Running is a big part of my life, and it's something at the moment I'm recovering from injury, but I run every day, 6 days a week. And when that crow incident happened, and then it happened again and again, I think there was 3 or 4 instances in the space of a few months. It wasn't a one-off, and I got it in my head that every time I'm going to go out and run, I got to scan the skies. That situation was the trigger point, because it was like, okay, this is affecting my running. It's affecting something I love to do. And so, yes, I did. I spoke to 2 people, and of course they came with their best intentions, and in some cases they helped me in some other areas, but they weren't able to really get into the ornithophobia itself. And I'll be honest, I felt a little despondent. I thought, I don't think I'm going to be able to be cured. And Russell will smile at this, because I think he got that sense. Russell can read me quite well, and he's very talented at what he does. And he sort of sensed in our first couple of sessions that, I'm thinking, I'm not curable, and which I believe is quite common for people that have long-standing phobia. So I was a little cynical, I suppose.
I originate from UK, just like you, and I'm now living not far from you, really. My office is very, very short distance to your home. So in our home country, the behavior of the crow is not the same as the crows over here. Crows in the UK tend to keep themselves to themselves, and we can walk through a park, and the last thing they want to do is get involved with human beings. Now, when I moved into this area, when I came to live in Dubai, just like James, I noticed that the crows, they're slightly smaller. James was able to avoid birds so much easier in the UK. True?
True.
He then moves into an area in Dubai called JLT, but it's not just JLT, it's all over. And I've interviewed clients as they come in with different phobias and different problems. I asked them about crows and about birds because I wanted to build up a picture. And everyone's got a story. Everyone's got this story like, oh yeah, they do protect themselves, especially in the breeding season. And that might be that they dive close to humans, and this bird touched me. I wouldn't use the word attack. I think that happens in the phobic's mind. They see that as an attack, and that's what happens. And James, the more you talk to James, the more you'll realize, very talented man. And one of his talents is so creative and so imaginative but that went against him with his phobia, because he was imagining, if you listen to some of the dialogue, that he'd spent 40 years from childhood to present day, and he's a very logical man. If you spend any time with him, you will know he's a very logical, talented person. But he had this irrational story, this irrational fear, which he added to. So he had all all these misconceptions, distortions, and ideas around what the birds were doing. And he never questioned it. He just believed it, which intensified the fears. And you could talk to James and say, I get this. It's totally irrational. I understand it doesn't make sense. But the reality is the physiology of his body was giving you all the symptoms as if there was a lion in the room with him. So absolutely. Phobias with everybody are irrational, and the people know they're irrational, but it doesn't matter because the feelings are real.
I was getting ready to go to bed one night, and my balcony is dark, and I just saw something in the corner that wasn't there, because I keep my balcony pretty clean, and I thought, oh no, I wonder what that is. Like it could be a bird, it could be a dead bird, and the dead bird to me was a big problem. Okay, and the thought of a dead bird on the balcony, I think, what else could it be? I couldn't even open the door to look at it. That's the type of phobia that it was. And I wanted to, but I had to put the blinds down and go to bed. And I couldn't really sleep that night because my bed is like quite close to the balcony. So it's only like a pane of glass. This is the sort of weird things that what a phobia does to you, even though if it was dead, you know, but it was there. And anyway, it was in my mind a lot. And then I actually had to summon up quite a lot of courage the next day to open up that blind and look. And it's almost like, and it would be very hard for someone that doesn't have a phobia to understand this, but it's almost like a catastrophic event. So I had to almost like kind of inching ever closer to look at what this was. And I could see it was it was something there, but I couldn't really even look. So I thought, okay, look, I'm going to go downstairs and get our maintenance team. We're lucky enough, we've got security mates, just go and have a look. And what I thought, and I said to them, look, I think there may be a bird on the balcony. I think it may be dead. Can you go and have a look? And, you know, they sort of looked at me and said, why can't you look yourself? And I didn't want to get into too many, because most people don't empathize with this type of, they would just say, what, you know? So anyway, they went and had a look, and they said, oh, actually, no, it's a pigeon, it's nesting. It's created a nest. And for them, it was like, oh, it's great. And I was like, oh no, this is a big problem for me. I can't have a pigeon nesting on the balcony.
What are the feelings like, James? Could you just describe when you saw that? You said, you know, you were in bed and you couldn't sleep. What are the feelings like for someone that has this problem?
High anxiety. And I'm someone that doesn't really suffer from anxiety in my general life. I'm quite.
I've seen you on stage talking to people, and you own the stage. It is really irrational because I've got to know you, and you're just the complete opposite to this. But it's just this small area in your life which was having a major impact. Physical experience.
Right. So very high anxiety, increased heart rate. It's almost like kind of catastrophic, like something bad is happening, but like a sense of doom. It's really quite a phenomenal feeling for something that, and remember, my rational side knows that there's no thing. Whether it's alive or dead or it's like, again, it's a wonderful part of nature, right? A pigeon, you know. All my rational side is, this is great. Like I'm at one with nature, but there's the other side, the phobic side, that has built up this narrative that this is bad, and so anxiety, not being able to relax. I've got to deal with this. Can I deal with this? That's the type of feel, and it's basically the feeling is like I cannot relax until that's been dealt with again. But then I thought I really got to find some help here on this one, because. That's debilitating. So yeah, that was the pigeon story.
Yeah. In tools of the humans, we speak about exactly this: the tools that people use to face challenges and how they overcame the challenges. And the credit on you is to seek for help. This is something I always bring to the athletes or to the pilots. You know, if something doesn't quite add up, seek for help. But what were the strategies that the tools that Russell used with you? What was the strategy there, and which allow you gradually to overcome the phobia?
Yeah, I mean, the tools were phenomenal and still are. And the reason I eventually found Russell was we have a mutual friend, good friend of ours called Pua, who is actually my next door neighbor. And Pua and I take these nice evening walks sometimes. He's quite a deep thinker, and he was, we were talking about this phobia, and he said, look, I think I have someone that might be able to help, can help you, might be able to help you. And that's how the connection was made. As I said, I was not cynical, but okay, they're going to need to be good. Yeah, so I had seen, a sort of a NLP type of therapist, and I had done some work on some other areas in these, more kind of holistic area. I was willing to try different things. I'd also done some hypnotherapy tapes a little bit earlier in my life, recognizing something and read some books and videos, but nothing, really got there. And I think, Russell's, I think there's a couple of things. I think there's the tools, which I'll talk about, because that was the question you asked me, Tommaso, but I think Russell's nature and his, he sort of alluded to this, his flexibility, he takes I would assume a customized approach to every client. I got that sense, like Russell sort of could get to know who I am, and he talked about that analytical side. That's one of my strengths, but like any strength can also be a weakness. I'm a very disciplined type of person, so he was able to sort of use my strengths to help me, and he would spend quite a lot of time with me as well, talking about who I am as well, and I think as part of his way of the strategy. And so there were a number of tools. I think that was the first tool, was actually a customized approach, getting to know me and what would work, and talking about my background. And one of the there was actually quite a few tools that we used. One of the most powerful was called in vivo exposure, which is going out to face your fear. And that wasn't easy, because essentially that meant going out to sit in this area that Russell talked about, JLT, which Jumeirah Lake Towers, where I live. And Russell actually came out with me the first couple of times. And I think it would be fair to say, Russell, that you really got a sense of how high my anxiety could be when we just sat at a Costa coffee and there was crows around. He said, what's your anxiety level now on a 1 to 10? It's like, yeah, probably around it's 7.
Yeah.
And
James has had this problem for, I calculated, about 40 years, James.
about that, yeah.
That's a long time to hold a collective belief structure around how dangerous these birds are to his existence. So and also his creative mind, this man, you're going to be reading books in the future, I'm sure, that will be from James, because he's so, or you'll be watching a movie one day that James has directed, because he is so creative. So when you spend time with him and you listen to the way he communicates, and you're probably getting an idea of that from the way he articulates on here, but he's just got an amazing imagination. And what we have to do is we have to disassemble some of those belief structures. So he talks about this collective approach, which I use, but it differs from people to people. But if someone's had a phobia and they've gone to so-called specialists, that each time that specialist doesn't achieve what they want, then that person doesn't blame the specialist, he blames himself. And then they start to believe, I can't be fixed. And again, I say this with the greatest respect, because of James's journey and how long he'd had this problem. He came in negative. It was almost like he convinced himself, yeah, I'll try working with Russell, but I probably won't work because it's never worked in the past. So before, and I did comment a few times, didn't I, James, with you, and said, you're actually deconstructing the work. We need to, to get this work, I'm convinced that I'll be able to help you, but we need to deconstruct some of the ways you're approaching this, because some of your thoughts, and understandably so, because of his past experiences where he tried things and they hadn't succeeded, he was sort of saying, I've got to live with this. This is because I've been places and they haven't helped me. So it must be something to do with me. And his talk was very much that this is something he's got to live with. And so I had to deconstruct that. Once we deconstructed that, then you're at base. We're at ground zero, and then we could do some really good work. But carry on. I wanted to add balance because that was because I think because of the nature, his personality, that I just had to immerse, and I wanted to get the result for him, and it was really important.
When you face a phobia, phobia is at avoiding the stimulus. So when you face it, you're no longer avoiding the stimulus. Technically, you no longer have a phobia. And that was something that Russell taught me early on. I thought I really liked that. And I want to go and face these fears. I feel like I've got quite good resolve. And so I reflected more on that. I said, okay, it's really important that tomorrow, the Sunday, that I go out. It's really important I go out, like get back on the bike. And I did. And I went out for 30 minutes and it was fine. The technique, I think the breathing and the exposure are clearly very, very important. But I think the other tool which really helped, and as I said, there was quite a few, but Russell perhaps has the more technical name for this, but we call it the zigzag.
Let's go back in time. James, and I call this a courtroom. James is living in a world where he's in a courtroom and the judge and the jury and the prosecution are his mind. And so there's no defense because he's convinced himself that the only way he's going to get through life when birds are in his proximity is to avoid them because they're dangerous. They create intense feelings and it's going to result in his demise or in something bad. And he's not rationalizing. So what we do, this term that we're talking about, zigzag, what we do is we identify the unhealthy, irrational beliefs. And we put them, each belief, in a box. And this piece of paper this sheet, which we call the zigzag, then has an attack of that belief. So we find out the rational belief and we write that down. And then we attack that belief because we need to find what James's irrational attack would be about that healthy belief. And then once we've done that, we then attack his irrational belief with a healthy belief. Now, why do we do that? Well, we do it to add balance and to bring a rational argument, which phobics don't do. They're in the courtroom on their own. And if you're in the courtroom on your own as a prosecution, you're going to win every case, aren't you? You're going to convince the judge, the jury, and yourself that you're guilty. And so by bringing this defense in, and I'm the person who will create these rational beliefs because James doesn't think of them. He hasn't thought about them for 40 years. So I create them and then present them to James. James hears those beliefs and then thinks on his rational mind, yeah, that makes sense. I get that. I still believe the opposite, but I get what you're saying. And where then he goes through this, it takes this home, thinks about it, processes it. And then what we do is we introduce this technique called two chair, and James spoke about this, where I asked him to sit in one chair and speak to the empty chair as if he's in that chair. Now, for the first time in his life, he's actually saying something to himself to dispute the irrational belief. Now, we do this and we show them how to create. If you're in an argument with somebody and you've got a point to make and you strongly believe what you believe, then you tend to sort of have conviction, don't you? You raise your voice slightly, or your body language is a bit firmer. So what we do is we ask them to just say in one chair the unhealthy belief, and then in the other chair to sort of say it with conviction, as if you mean it. And what happens is, over a process of time and practicing this, you're starting to hear your own voice. So you're bringing in the defense into the courtroom. And when you start to bring in the defense into the courtroom, and it's not someone else telling you, it's yourself, then the jury starts to listen and start to understand, hang on a minute, there's more to this case than meets the eye. And it's all done, you know, on an unconscious level. And so you're starting to bring rationalization into this. So it's a very, very useful tool, or one of the tools. What I would say, on a conscious level, James will say to you, this was really effective. That really helped, because he's a very logical man. So I tailored my work to suit his personality. But on an unconscious level, there was work done in hypnosis. And when you're using a multi-pronged attack on the problem, he won't actually know what necessarily, he'll feel that certain things work. He'll know that really worked for me because I improved in that. But because we're using multiple approaches to the problem, one supports the other. So there will be things said in hypnosis that validate what he's been taught to think consciously. So there's layers of technique. And I think that's the advantage. When you get somebody who's not just using one technique, it's like going, I compare it, it's like going, you know, these MMA fighters that know judo and aikido, and when they're on the ground, they use jiu-jitsu, and you don't have a chance because there's a multiple technique for every, you know, attack. And so we were using these different techniques as and when we adapt, or I adapt my approach depending on the individual in front of me. And that's what James was referring to in his opening statement. I think there was this multiple approach that he hadn't experienced before.
No, that's a great articulation of the zigzag and the two chair, and I find that, yeah, very, very effective for me.
You took ownership, to be fair. In this very logical approach, one has to take ownership, because there has been in the past people that you'll teach them these techniques and I'll say the week later, did you do it? And they're like, oh, I haven't had time. Well, you know, it only works if you immerse yourself in it. And to James's credit, he immersed himself in it. And that's why he's where he is.
It was a top priority. It was the most important priority I was working on at the time, because it was related to health.
It was impacting your life. I mean, who wants to leave a dining area outside on a beautiful Dubai, you know, day with management and say, I'm sorry, I can't cope, there's a bird? That's not really where he wants to be. And he's, you know, he's got all these skills. And from my perspective, it's probably thought, you know, that one little thing was affecting the way that he was communicating with people and interacting with people. It was a big thing. So I know why you put the effort in, because it was life-changing for you. And it was, I
think what is the advice that you're going to give to people that are struggling with phobia? But the way I see it, put it as a top priority, then take responsibility, seek help, and be disciplined. Which is, as a fighter pilot, you're telling me exactly the things that we do for our line of business, which is, you know, to achieve the goal. You know, like, for example, you know, if there is a target, we always use a multiple access attack for the simple reason that there are defenses, and there are, you know, they have different characteristics. So if you're only going from one direction, you're not going to succeed. So what advice would you give to somebody that is struggling with a specific fear of birds like yours?
It's okay if you have a phobia. It's nothing to do with you know, it's not a defect. It's not a human defect. And there are people like Russell who can help, and it can be helped. I've made a lot of progress. I was able to sit outside in cafes for the first time. My mum was over, we had a nice meal outside, and she knows about this, and she said, oh, it's it's great, because I saw there were birds outside, and how relaxed you were, and so there's been a couple of times, and in fact I had a meal with a lunchtime meal with two friends of mine. There was crows, quite a lot of them in the outdoors area, and I actually chose to sit outside. But first of all, I would not have put myself in that situation 3-4 months ago. And B, if I did put myself in that situation and I found, wow, there's crows, I would have said, hey guys, can we go inside? Because I've done that for years. And I didn't do that. And I did tell them, actually, this is quite interesting. If you met me 3 months ago, we wouldn't be having this, we wouldn't be sitting outside. And I was actually using an anchoring technique a little bit as well, which is something like positive anchors, just to help in that situation when there's crows flying around.
And when James is talking about anchoring, this particular, you can anchor it, you don't need to use fingers. I've anchored a feeling of intensity and aggression in a boxer with his gum shield, but with James's, I just put it into his 2 fingers. So we ask him to squeeze the fingers together and then bring in that relaxed state and anchor it into that. It's no different of dad coming home and sitting in his comfortable chair, but he says to his child, "Come on, son, out my chair." And the son's puzzled by that sometimes. He'll look at, well, there's another chair over there. Why don't you sit in that one? He says, no, this is where he's thinking this unconscious. This is where I relax. So we all have anchors and triggers in life. Sometimes people have to hold the remote control and sit in their comfortable chair, and they won't feel comfortable unless they've got control of the control. So we've all got different anchors in life. I'll tell you an anchor of mine. This. If I take my glasses off, that's when I go to sleep and relax. So if any time I take because these are on all day, but the only time they come off is when I go to bed. So that's an anchor and a trigger. So we can install these in hypnosis. They're far much more effective. And then when he goes out into a situation which would then trigger anxiety, he can fire the anchor and bring in that confident feeling or that relaxed feeling. And so the brain inside the amygdala then can adjust and bring those comfortable feelings, which can cancel out the old feelings. But this is what he's referring to when he's saying he's firing his anchors.
I used those anchors in that particular situation just to help. And it's sort of knowing that I've got those tools, knowing I've got that toolbox that I can employ. And I was able to actually enjoy a lunch, not really thinking too much about it. And that's tremendous progress for, that just wouldn't have happened 3-4 months ago. And that example then becomes up here. I've done that before. I can therefore do it again and keep doing that. So, but, to answer your question around, the advice, as I mentioned, it's not a defect, first of all. It can be worked on, it can be cured, because there's people like Russell out there with the skills and the empathy and the experience to help. Mindfulness is something that Russell and I spent some time on as well. But I'm out every day with nature anyway, so I'm still with the birds, and I feel very differently around them now as well. So that's what I would say.
A couple of years ago, there was a young boy whose parents brought him in because he wouldn't come out into the garden. They had a beautiful villa here in Dubai and lovely pool and lovely garden. And he wouldn't come out in the garden because he had a fear of bees. So he was about 10 and he'd been stung by a bee. So he had his story, and we did some work. We did some hypnosis. Now, I remember, because I did a photo shoot at the bottom of my office, just outside here. And I remember there was these hedges. They're not here now because they've built some office blocks. And there was bees. So just like James, and this is the difference. I really feel strongly about this. that people need to get from behind the desk and calibrate in the situation. They need to work with their clients at close quarter with their fears. So I took this boy downstairs in the first session because he hadn't had this fear for 40 years. He hadn't been on the planet for 40 years. He'd only been alive for 10. And so he'd only had the fear for a couple of years. And I took him downstairs and took him, and he was apprehensive. I said, we're going to go and find some bees. And he was, really? I said, yeah. And he stood with me next to this hedge where there was bees just hovering around, doing their thing, collecting pollen. And I remember him saying, what have you done? I'm not frightened anymore. So it can happen really quickly, depending on how long you've had it, because the neurological pathways that we use in our mind, the more we use them, I use this comparison, this metaphor, they're no different to taking a shortcut across a park. And if you keep using that path every day, then eventually the grass wears out and you have a pathway, a clear pathway. So if you've been doing that for 40 years, then that path is going to be well worn, isn't it? In comparison to someone that's only had this, a few years. Or there was a young girl I was working with yesterday, and she's had this phobia, and it's quite intense, albeit she's only had it for a couple of months, and that's a fear of vomiting. She goes into the same sort of response that you do, James, when she vomits herself or she sees other people vomiting. But she's only had it for a couple of months. So depending on how long you've had a problem can affect the way you approach the problem and the time it takes. Everyone's different. And so you can't treat everyone the same. You have to have this almost this chameleon approach. You have to change the way that you work with somebody depending on how they present. And that's where that emerged. And that's where James was saying earlier, Russell understood me. And so they're all different. They're all different. And the mind's different. So you can actually have someone that has a phobia and has had it for a long time, and you can make some really quick shifts. And because we're all different, we've all experienced different things in life. We've been brought up differently, we've been parented differently, and all these variables make the difference.
Let me see if I understood correctly, because obviously you're talking about tailored approach, and we're all different, and we have many variables that are playing the game here. But the way I understand, the more the situation humans brought forward, it becomes a chronic situation, and at the point you build barriers and you build like walls. You're resisting to get out of the situation. But the less the time, then it's easier for you to overcome these fears or to overcome these issues that people have.
You remember Pauline, who had the 2 crashes? It took 2 crashes to traumatize her and make her phobic of falling. There was a girl that I worked with that had, when she was young, a fear of chickens. And no other birds, just chickens. She was feeding the chickens corn. She lived on a farm, and she's feeding them, and she was wearing sandals, and the bag broke and the corn went into her shoes. And the chickens, her perception, not reality, were pecking at her feet to get at the corn. They weren't after her, but she didn't know that. And because she hadn't addressed the problem, just like James, she'd held on to it for 40 years. Maybe she was embarrassed. Maybe she didn't know where to go or to where to get help. And we came across each other, and again, I took her down to a farm where there was chickens, and we worked on the problem together. So everyone's different, and there's so many variables that you can't really explain, because it's it could be 40 years ago, it could be 2 months ago, but also the way that people perceive the world as well. And as I said with James, he's got a very creative mind. If you don't have that creative mind, James, a long time ago, saw a movie called The Birds by a very famous director, Alfred Hitchcock. And he saw that at young. How old were you when you watched that film, James?
I actually seen it probably 2 or 3 times. Probably the first time.
A glutton for punishment.
Yeah, I know. I really shouldn't have watched it because it only made things worse. But late teens, I think, Russell.
Okay, so late teens. For people who've never seen this film, it's about birds taking over the planet and attacking human beings. And I'm sure that with his creative mind and seeing that movie in his teens with this problem, it exasperated the problem. Now, someone else with a phobia might have seen the film and they weren't as creative or imaginative as James. And then it might not have affected them. So there's just so many variables. What I do, I often compare myself with a detective. I have to sort of jump into the murder scene, so to speak, and analyze situation. You know, remember Columbo, the TV detective, and he'd be like, as he walked out of the room, oh, there's just one other question. It's very much like that. So there, and sometimes I'll be working with a client and the session's over and I'll walk them to the elevator or I'll walk them down to the car park sometimes. And they'll tell me something that's so significant. It's a real Columbo moment and they don't realize. And they'll say, oh, by the way, la, 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 right? And I'll be like, haha, got it. And I'll use that in the next session. So there's a lot of detective work goes on, a lot of stuff that I won't share necessarily with James that means a lot to me that I can then use later on. So going back to your original question, it's so different. And that is why this one-pronged approach doesn't work. So most of the people that come to me will say, you're my last hope. I've tried different things and it haven't worked. And I'm almost not expecting this to work. And James was like that. He was like, I could tell he was given up on himself. You've got to talk to them and say, look, no, it doesn't matter what you've done in the past. We're going to approach it in a different way. And we're going to use a collective approach. And usually, I'm not God, but usually we get a breakthrough. And it's because of those variables that I use with, this collective approach with the clients. So there's many things. There's so many things that affect. And some of those things will not be in their conscious awareness. They won't be able to tell me because they don't remember. I had a woman once who had a fear of staircases. And it's online. It's on my website. And she shares her story. It's about 20 years ago. And she didn't remember. She was a little girl, and this came out in the hypnosis. She just came out of the hypnosis session, and she said, while I was in there, I had a memory, we call it an engram memory release. And she said, I remember when I was a little girl, I was in a park, and I saw myself climbing up this ladder, a slide, the metal slides. And nowadays they have all this cork matting and soft landing to protect children. In our day, it was concrete. So she walked up this ladder and her mother was at the bottom of the slide saying, come down. It's the first time she used the slide. And she said, I'll fall, mummy. And she said, no, you won't. You'll be fine. And she got to the top. And what did she do? She fell, landed on her head, which you can imagine is quite a height. And I don't know if she fractured bone, but she certainly hurt herself. She had concussion, was rushed to hospital. And it was the first time in her life that she'd been separated from her mother. She was only a little girl. And that had been suppressed and buried in her subconscious mind. What happened was she could not walk up or down staircases because she had this fear of falling. But she didn't know until we did some hypnosis, and she had this memory release. And so we started to see these pictures of what happened. And I think that was quite cathartic in its own right, that she was able to think, I remember why now. I got it. Because some people that's important to. Others, they don't care how they got it. They just want to get fixed. So that's another interesting story that you can actually go back. It wasn't on Zoom. It was just done on a one-to-one. But the crew that filmed her, she shares her story and how it develops and the impacts that it had on her life, just like James. It was affecting her life, so she decided to work on it. So there's so many variables. And James remembered 2 incidents. Trafalgar Square, which was a bit vague, and then that other incident with the bird, which, if you're on your own, you're a young boy in a room, and birds, they keep hitting the glass trying to escape, it can be traumatic to a child, not knowing what to do, and so they're probably having a panic attack. But there might have been other memories that James had that just he doesn't know or didn't access. So we're all different, and I think that's important as a practitioner to recognize that and be able to adapt your approach to suit those differences.
I think we are at the end of the episode. Is there anything else, James, that you want to share or want to highlight from this journey that continues?
Well, I think I think having the right help is everything. I've learned a lot actually from the session. Not only am I happy that the great progress that's been made, but I've actually also learned things as well along the way. It's quite a you go into quite a reflective state doing this type of work, because you're really deconstructing this structure in your mind. And I think even the work we did around mindfulness and breathing has a lot of value beyond the phobia. I use the breathing actually more generally now, and the mindfulness, I'm more appreciative of those moments as well. So I think it's a journey that I'm really glad that I took. I'm very glad that I found someone, as I said, of Russell's capabilities and empathy and skill set, because I've got these tools now for life, and it's something I'm going to continue using. So very appreciative of that fact. I think life is a journey. We're always learning. We never have all the answers. I think Russell's been absolutely right. We're all very different, and what works for me might not work for someone else. But that multifaceted approach certainly seems to give us a very good shot at doing that. So no, that's really my thoughts on that, Tommaso. I appreciate the opportunity to come in and speak to yourself today along with Russell and share a little bit of my story. And if that gives others perhaps in the same situation some hope, then it feels like a very valuable thing to have done.
Thank you for being part of Tools of the Humans. I am TC, the expert, Russell Hemmings. See you next time.
Take care. Bye, James.